Thank you very much, Sakura, and thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Matthias Krey. I'm part of the management team of Perspectives Climate Group. And yesterday we heard at this very exciting day one of the workshop, we heard a lot about general approaches to integrate CCS and carbon markets. And the Article 6 was mentioned quite a lot of times during yesterday's presentation. And what I want to do in my presentation, I want to take a step back and then take a look forward. And what I want to talk about precisely is how to practically generate carbon credits. Where's the demand and what do prices look like? What is the role of the standards and the methodologies to unlock carbon crediting for CCS projects? And at the end, I would like to present to you an investment analysis for a CCS project case and draw some conclusions from it. A few words about my company, Perspectives Climate Group. This year is a very important year for us because we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of our company. It was founded 20 years ago in Germany, and our team is all about creating positive impact for our clients and the climate. And we do this through two things, really. One, our independent advisory services, so independent because we do not develop projects or trade carbon credits, and also our active contribution to relevant discussions, and let's call it change processes in the market that are particularly going on these days. And they are namely to make the carbon market Paris aligned and fit for the net zero future. One of our key strengths is developing solutions for carbon crediting that are practical and that ensure the environmental integrity of the activities that our clients are undertaking. And that is why we are very proud of having founded and now leading the secretariat of the CCS Plus initiative together with our colleagues from South Pole. And we consider this initiative as vitally important for helping scale CCS projects through carbon finance. But back to the topic and the basics. How does today's market for carbon credits from carbon credit mechanisms look like? This slide shows how the various carbon crediting mechanisms are related to the different sources of demand for carbon credits. And I want to go through this with you step by step, and let's start with the mitigation activity itself that you see here at the top. That is, for example, a CCS project that is reducing emissions. Such projects can be registered under carbon crediting mechanisms, or let's call them standards. And you can see here that there are a variety of mechanisms under which such projects can be registered so that they can generate carbon credits. We heard a presentation from the JCM yesterday. We heard about the Article 6. We also heard about the voluntary carbon market. And all those standards have their own processes for registering a project, so that after implementation of the project, it can generate carbon credits. And each of the standards has its own quality control processes that a carbon credit really delivered emission reductions before the carbon credits are issued. Once they are issued, they can be traded on the carbon market, and they can be used for example, voluntary offsetting for corporates, can be used for CORSIA compliance by the airlines, and they can also be used in the future for NDC compliance by governments under the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. As we heard yesterday, the rules of this Article 6 are in the making. Now let's take a deeper look at what is happening on the level of the mechanism or the standard so that eventually carbon credits can be issued. Here you see what we refer to as the carbon credit cycle. It shows how carbon credits are generated conceptually and what are the steps involved there. And I would like you to have a look now at the left side of the two columns, which is called activity design. It all starts with the activity developer using an approved methodology, and I'll come back to that in a minute, an approved methodology to describe the project in the context of the standard, in the context of how it's reducing emissions. And each mechanism and standard has its own template. So this is the step activity design you can see here. And once this project documentation template using the approved methodology is filled out and sent to the standard, then the validation starts. So there will be a third-party auditor checking all the documentation of the project, and will go on site to check, if everything, as you described it and as the project developer described it in the design document is actually correct. And once that is done, the validation report is issued, then the project is registered under the standard. After the implementation and after the registration, then the emission reductions are monitored and reported according to the methodology and according to the monitoring, reporting, and verification plan that was included in the activity design document. And also this report is checked by a third-party auditor, which we call a verifier, and this third-party auditor verifies the emission reductions or the mitigation outcomes. And only if that has been duly completed and the verification report has been received by the standard will then issue the carbon credits into its registry, and the carbon credits can be used by the project owner and will eventually be purchased on the market in the form of those carbon credits. And it is standard practice that carbon credits are often, let's say, sold before they are given out as carbon credits. And this can be done, for example, by an emission reduction purchase agreement, which can help finance projects and de-risk the projects, because investors know that there will be a revenue stream coming from this project in the future, an additional revenue stream, or sometimes the only revenue stream for these projects. And as you can imagine, a question that we are often asked at Perspectives is my CCS project idea fit for carbon credit generation? And the answer is your project is eligible if you are meeting a couple of very important requirements. And the requirements are, among others, that first of all, and as I had already mentioned on the previous slide, that you need an approved methodology in the standard. So without an approved methodology, there is no way you can fill in a project documentation and apply for registration. So that's really the basis. But there are also other requirements. There is the requirement of additionality. This was mentioned also yesterday in an Article 6 presentation, if I'm not mistaken. Additionality means that your project has to reduce emissions compared to what would have happened otherwise, or to put in simple terms, your project has to depend on the revenue of carbon credits, because otherwise it would have been implemented anyway, and the emission reductions would not have would have happened anyway, and therefore your project doesn't need the carbon credit. And the third point that I would like to highlight here is that, and this is a particularly important requirement for CCS projects, this was also mentioned yesterday, that your project has to address permanence. So the CO2 stored, has to stay in the ground, and you have to demonstrate that this is feasible with your storage site, so that your project can be registered. Now, there are more requirements, but I don't want to go into all of those. I just want to mention that there is the ICROA Code of Best Practice for Voluntary Carbon Markets, where different standards are endorsed by ICROA according to their requirements and what a standard has to fulfill to be considered best practice in the carbon market. So these are the requirements, and the amount of carbon credits you can generate after project implementation are calculated according to this very simple formula. The emission reductions are the baseline emissions, those that would have happened without your project, minus the project emissions, and these give you the carbon credits, and multiplied by the price could give you the revenue. But how you get to this formula, emission reductions equal baseline emissions minus project emissions, requires a lot of conceptual and technical thinking at the methodology development stage. And particularly for CCS, a methodology is a complex task, as we are dealing with many different activities and technologies, and the complete value chain of capture, transport, and storage, which can be complex or can also be less complex, but it's something special compared to other project types that we know from carbon crediting. But the good news is that there are starting points, and this was already mentioned yesterday, and there was a kind of similar slide as I'm sharing it here with you now. This slide shows an overview of approved methodologies for different types of CCS projects. And when I say types of CCS project, I, in this case, really mean a broadest possible definition of CCS, including direct air capture and biomass energy based carbon capture as well. Some of the information, as I said, was already shown yesterday, but what I want to highlight is that only one methodology is available at the moment under an approved, sort of endorsed ICROA standard, which is the American Carbon Registry methodology, and we will hear more about, we will have an American Carbon Registry presentation right after mine, so I'm really looking forward to that. And most of the methodologies you can see also here have limited applicability in terms of scope. And this is what we're aiming to change with the CCS Plus initiative, and my colleague Christian Geyers-Deinert will say more about this in a later presentation. Let's for the moment assume we would have improved methodology for any type of CCS project. How do carbon credit prices look in relation to project cost? So this is a slide showing volumes in the carbon market over time, and on the right-hand side, some information on prices. I don't want to go too deep here into this, but what you can see is that the volumes are fairly low, and that CCS is almost absent in the credits that have been issued on the voluntary carbon market. And you also see that the average prices in the voluntary carbon market are very low. By very low, I mean average carbon price between $2 to $3. And they depend on the project type. So some project types fetch partially considerably higher prices, but the volumes for those higher prices in the market are fairly low and are pilot volumes, let's say for carbon removal, carbon credits, for example. And there is the expectations that prices will be higher in the future because all countries need own mitigation to fulfill the NDC targets. But that is not the market reality today if you look at the prices on the voluntary carbon market these days. And regarding costs for CCS, well, the costs are way beyond current price levels in the VCM. As you can see here, I've chosen a figure from the International Energy Agency, and it shows that the capture costs only, because this is what it shows here, are already above those average voluntary carbon market prices. And if you add the storage costs of a minimum, as it's estimated around $12 per ton, then you have to conclude that there is not a clear match. And this means that in the short term, this does not work from an investment point of view. Voluntary carbon market and carbon credit generation for CCS doesn't look like a viable option. A notable exception where the financials can work out is CCS, enhanced oil recovery or enhanced gas recovery, because there's an economic benefit of increased fossil fuel extraction. But this is also the reason why these projects are criticized from the environmental perspective. So there is there is a mismatch in terms of prices and the need and the intent to incentivize non-EUR CCS projects through carbon markets. So what should we make out of this? In the short term, we have, this is my opinion. I would conclude that the carbon market is unlikely to incentivize investments in CCS projects on its own. On the contrary, we could conclude where governments around the world are building policy frameworks to support investments, particularly in the US, through the 45Q, for example. There a stacking of the different revenue sources can work, and this for me would mean that I expect that a large number of first mover carbon crediting projects will want to stack this carbon revenue and the public funding for reaching the economic viability of their projects. So this was the general picture, but for the purpose of this presentation, we wanted to dig a little bit deeper. And in the last couple of years, I looked with my team at a few real or planned CCS projects and evaluated their carbon crediting feasibility. And based on this experience, we designed, let's say, a generic project case and conducted an investment analysis for it. And these results I want to share with you now. So we chose a very simple case, and this is carbon capture and storage in a new gas field. And this has the following parameters. The source project activity is the native CO2 from the gas field. The capture process takes place in the acid gas removal process, and the storage of the CO2 takes place in a depleted oil or gas reservoir. And let's assume the start year of this project would be in 2 years, so 2025. The project lifespan for carbon crediting would be 25 years, and the native CO2 that would be generated and captured would be 1 million tons. To make it simple, and the project emissions would be 150,000 tons per year. And so the emission reduction resulting from the project would be 850,000 tons per year. So what did we do with this case? We calculated the maximum CAPEX allowed. So the maximum CAPEX allowed for achieving different target internal rate of returns at different carbon price levels. And we assumed that the OPEX, just for simplification, we assumed that the OPEX is 5% of the CAPEX. There would be 25 years of carbon crediting, and we took a discount rate, as you can see here, of 8%. The results of the analysis we did look like this. For this set of modeled case, generating 850,000 tons of CO2 emission reduction per year, the maximum allowable CAPEX for capture, transport, and storage in the best case scenario, which is this one here on the left side, on the best case scenario, which is a carbon price of $20 per ton and a very modest target IRR of 5%, is $140 million. So under our assumptions on carbon price $20 and target IRR of 5%, the maximum capex of the project would be $140 million. Otherwise, the IRR would even go further down. Now, a number of participants in this workshop who are experts in CCS can better judge than I can if this sounds feasible or not. But based on what I've seen in projects and also reports, the required investment for such a project will probably be higher than 140 million capex. But of course, this depends on each individual case and each individual situation. But that's my reading from it. combining this information, the general cost price match, and also using the results of the sort of case study investment analysis modeling that we've done here, I like to provide the following outlook for CCS and carbon crediting. First, it is great, and it's an important starting point that there are approved and upcoming carbon crediting methodologies that can make CCS carbon crediting possible, because that's the underlying condition that I explained, that we need to eventually generate carbon credits from CCS projects. And the costs and carbon credit prices will differ by CCS technologies, as the IEA figure has shown. And the stacking of carbon credit revenues and public funding will be necessary, at least for several years, I would suppose, for most CCS project types, before really wide-scale deployment can be reached. And the JCM and Article 6 pilot, but also other schemes, can help here to bridge the current gap between the low carbon prices that we see in the market at the moment and the actual costs of CCS projects. So with that, I like to conclude, and I'm really looking forward to your questions on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthias. I also learned a lot. And I believe carbon credit life cycle is now very clear to all of us. And thank you for sharing the very informative case study as well. Well, now I have several questions for you. I picked just one. Okay, I go this. How will multiple CO2 sources be treated in the carbon credit scheme? Who claims credit when CO2 owner varies depending on the source, and how should such CO2 be monitored? Matthias, please.
Yes, this is a very, very good question, and this is also one of the questions when we started in the CCS Plus initiative together with our members in the CCS Plus initiative to write the first concept of the methodologies. How do we deal with a situation where we have a value chain project, and as the person asking the question rightly supposes, there could be a transport network, for example, where there are different CO2 sources entering the network. And so different CO2 sources could also go into one storage site. And what we have done, Christian will probably show this to you in one slide later. We have done a tool developed a tool that is providing the conceptual solutions for monitoring the amount of CO2 that goes from one site into a shared transport network and goes into a shared storage site. So we have found conceptual solutions there. If you're more interested in having a more detailed conversation about this, then please let me know. I'm actually sharing my contact details here on the last slide, and then we can exchange more information on this.
Thank you very much, Matthias. Hope you can stay online for a while with us and answer some other questions in Q&A box. And hope to see you soon again in person sometime this year.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.